You just want me to just start going? Cool. Okay. So, hi. My name's Paul Beckley. I'm a senior manager for data science with RBC Financial Crimes. King invited me to speak to you guys today. I'm just going to go through kind of relatively quickly a little bit about RBC and financial crimes in general. We'll talk a little bit about money laundering 101, and then of course switch to a little bit more of an analytics focus and where analytics are applied in AML. I'm going to demo a few capabilities and solutions that we have in place, at a high enough level, followed by a quick overview of some of the tools, techniques, technologies that we use at RBC. A quick forward look on where we see the industry going, technology, analytics, and then lastly, just a few kind of comments on what we look for at RBC as far as a career in AML, and more generally some of the trends we're seeing. So with that, in case anybody doesn't know, RBC is the largest bank in Canada. We're a top 15 bank globally, operating in 35 countries. I think it's even closer to 90,000 employees now, 16 million clients. Our 5 kind of key areas across the top there, supported by technology analysis, group risk management, and HR. So our financial crimes group is in the group risk management world. So in that, we've got obviously financial crimes, credit risk, market risk, op risk. So we really see financial crimes as a risk function within the bank. As far as the impetus for why banks care about financial crimes, first and foremost, it is money laundering and terrorist financing hurts the community. There's estimated $2.2 trillion made by organized crime groups. It's very much a Canadian problem as it is a global problem. It's not just something that's squirreled away to different parts of the world. The second kind of big reason is obviously we're required by law in a real kind of compliance function, compliance first. Especially recently, there's been a kind of record-setting year for banks getting hit with non-compliance fines. I think I say this particular article is up over 10 billion in fines this year. That also includes a lot of personal liability by bank executives, members of the board, chief anti-money laundering officers ending up with personal jail time and sentences internationally. And then, of course, lastly, the real reason why we do any of this is to foster trust in the financial system. We want to have the trust in it's safe to do business with RBC, it's safe to do business in Canada, and then at the same time, having a really effective program can let us get into different business sectors that were maybe outside of risk appetite before. So the example for that is the cannabis sector in Canada. Having a robust anti-money laundering financial crimes program can get into different market segments that we maybe previously weren't comfortable with. As far as money laundering 101, I'm sure everybody's at least loosely aware. I've seen Ozark or some of the drug trafficking shows. By definition, money laundering is the process used to disguise the source of money or assets derived from criminal activity. That definition is coming from FinTrack, but we do like to add the certain individuals under certain cases also are more concerned with hiding the destination of their funds, in particular the terrorist financing and any child exploitation, where it's potentially legitimate source of funds, but destined towards a criminal proceeds or criminal activity. Sorry. Basically, there's in general 3 steps to laundering money. So this particular diagram comes from FATA, the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body, kind of a think tank. money laundering. So the first step is considered placement, and this is how criminal proceeds are transferred into the fiat financial system. So this can be deposited by cash. It can be, something is bought or sold. How do you get your proceeds into the financial system? Now, of course, there are certain types of crimes where this placement step has already occurred. If you think of, examples of fraud where the currency, the asset, is already in the financial system. But in general, that's kind of the first step. The second step, of course, is your layering, and that's to obfuscate the source or the destination of where these funds. So this can be through a series of complex transactions, through the use of nominees, different accounts, different jurisdictions, and money launderers will really try to exploit differences in breakdowns in communications, in regulations between different countries and different financial institutions, different products, to kind of hide the source of those funds. And then, of course, the last kind of phase of this is to integrate it and make those legitimate, make those funds, illicit funds, look legitimate. And at the end of the day, this is really what the criminals care about. And that's, now these funds are available through some sort of vehicle to purchase real estate or luxury goods or reinvest into the criminal enterprise. Interesting kind of fact here, this integration piece, when it comes to actually disrupting financial crime, it's a much more effective deterrent to seize the funds of some of these major organized crime groups are much more concerned with losing their funds than actually ending up behind bars. Which kind of speaks to this value chain. So in our fight against financial crime, there's really a value chain of the various aspects that we need to do. So first off is the intelligence piece. So who are the bad actors? What are the bad transactions? What are the typologies? The specific behaviors we're looking for. Moving on into prevention. So this is your controls and your guidance. This is why you have to when you buy a house, verify the source of your funds. What is your KYC? Know your customer information. From there, it becomes a detection problem, and this is largely your transaction monitoring. This is how do we detect something's not right. Once it's been detected, then there's a certain aspect to investigate what actually is happening. Let's pull on these threads. Let's pull on these seeds to say, is this, does this meet our threshold for, for battiness? Do we need to actually take some action here? And then, of course, the last piece is to either recover those assets or seize those proceeds of crime, move forward with prosecution, and then finally, in particular, in some of the terrorist financing cases or cases that may be difficult to prosecute, is to actually just disrupt those professional money laundering operations or movements of funds. I think the key takeaway here is that the impact of the community, the efficiency, in fact, is really proportional to the entire value chain. And if there's any one of these pieces that is lacking, the system in general will not perform very efficiently. So how do we do that at RBC? I don't think this is going to be wildly different across any other at least Canadian financial institutions. But our financial crimes group is if you've heard of the first, second, and third lines of defense. First line being the branch staff, the people interacting with clients. Our group is a second line of defense, so we're doing establishing the standards and controls to meet requirements, providing guidance. We're developing all the risk assessment tools and models, performing those investigations to interface with law enforcement and regulators. Excuse me. And then, of course, all of the client risk rating, transaction monitoring, client screening, sanction screening, and that's really the core function of financial crimes. The third line of defense, of course, is the audit function. And there's an audit function internal to RBC where we'll have that oversight on what are we doing, what is the inherent risk, are there any issues or deficiencies in the program in that case. So, being this is an analytics course, I do kind of like to start with this, and because a lot of the buzzwords get thrown around. Is it AI? Is it machine learning? Is it analytics? Is it the deep neural net problem? And in general, we will take the capability to solve the problem rather than we don't have a whole deep learning research expertise. We don't have okay, we're going to treat this exclusively as natural language processing. We have those resources in an enterprise data and analytics function, but specific to our business role, we'll use whatever right capability for the problem we need to answer. This is just a diagram. It comes pretty close to, I think, where things fall, kind of in that spectrum. So how we do that is really coming down to building out these capabilities. So we'll build our internal capabilities, and that's really the tools and knowledge required to answer a question. So our themes of capabilities, the first one being activity. So these are all of your analytics, machine learning pieces about answering, what happened, when, where was this client, where did this money go, place and time type questions, investigative questions. The second theme is about entity. So who is this, or what is this company? What sector is this company in? And then again, we'll provide a lot of those analytics from the previous slide to answer some of these questions. Third one is your what's connected. So the obvious parallel here is through transaction. This entity sent money to this entity, and then it went here. But there's actually quite a few other graph problems when it comes to joint accounts, shared ownership, shared selectors. Did these, this one bad company was registered at the same address as this other company, and we treat a lot of these as graph problems. The fourth kind of group of capability is content, and that's what is this about? Whether it's a written text, whether it's audio, whether it's video, and these are the capabilities. Admittedly, we're not taking the full advantage of in financial crimes yet, but as research is progressing, and these types of analytics are becoming more scalable, more feasible. We'll be looking into more of that. And then lastly is the predictive nature of this. So you found something, you suspect of money laundering. How do we, what else looks like this? So in a traditional, supervised learning type model, say, here, this is bad, who else looks bad? But then also in maybe an unsupervised type fashion was, I don't quite understand this, who else is here? And then can we understand that? We'll then take all of these capabilities and combine them in different orders, in different pipelines. And this is really what makes up our core analytic solutions to support those other groups that I mentioned previously. So the first one being, supporting our major investigations. So any bespoke, tailored analytics to go after, these really large, complex cases. When you're talking about, dozens of clients, millions of transactions over long periods of time, how do we bring some power of these analytic capabilities to bear on those? Second piece being targeted behavior detection. So this is specifically going after specific behaviors, whether it's foreign fighters, whether it's behaviors related to human trafficking, whether it's professional money launderers, and how do we use the individual's behavior of their what and when and who to go after these very specific behaviors. Of course, anomaly detection. So This is weird. This is anomalous. Not necessarily bad, but it's different. Can we understand it? The compliance function, of course, and these are your kind of your red flags from a regulatory compliance aspect to make sure we've got our coverage. And then lastly, we also use our internal expertise to really support our program, which I'll speak to a little bit about that. All for the goal of really understanding our exposure, reducing our risk, having an awareness of our portfolio. So I'm going to go through just a few of our kind of example products just to give you an idea. So the first being, data stories. And I think this is really a fundamental skill and one of our key products, depending on what the ask is. For example, it could be understanding our inherent risk based on a specific client sector, and you present something like this to the business owner, who then goes, well, I do, or I don't agree with, that's not what I thought. On the top right there, this is a Sankey diagram just showing the movement of particular funds through different risks of jurisdiction. So from a high risk country to a high 2 country to, where is this going? Are we comfortable with this? Do we understand it? Of course, there's some COVID related charts here. So this is, what actually is happening. What's your percent change based on the average trend? Are we in a higher risk or lower risk environment? How have things changed? For example, the one on the right there, this is a percent change, I believe, of a certain client segment where the average is, has decreased slightly, but there's a good portion of the population who's, whether it's cash or deposits, has increased by 300%. What do we want to do about that? Do we investigate? Does it make sense? So those are just examples of some data stories. The second piece I'll mention is your, support to major investigations. So in this case, we'll use some network analytics to propagate bad actors. Who's connected to who and how, and what is your, whether it's as simple as some betweenness centrality metrics, or if as complicated as link prediction. How do we put this in front of an investigator to kind of guide their investigation? Of course, there's the geotemporal activity. How do we navigate? This is just, again, toy data here. Somebody's movements around, if you're trying to draw those non-obvious connections between a potential foreign fighter, or are they where they say they are, in the really major investigations. How do you draw out that investigative context? Lastly, this is just another example of some space-time activity. This is showing, I believe, the difference across hours of the day of the week, of when confirmed victims of human trafficking are making their transactions compared to a random sample of a similar population. And then this, provides some of the investigative context to this particular group. Okay, there's much more active on, early in the morning, late at night, relatively quiet during the day in comparison. And then how do you draw out that context to move forward? I think the bread and butter is the compliance models. So, very simply, how this works is from the client's transactions, that data is compiled by account, by transaction, by payment system, in which case the transaction monitoring system, a series of centralized models, again, across all products and all clients, will identify patterns that are unusual based on some identified risk indicators. And these are your red flags, or different typologies for different, whether it's a certain type of layering or a certain type of trade-based money laundering. All of these analytic models will then generate a series of alerts that are then presented to an individual to make a decision on whether a thorough investigation is then required, on those particular cases where there's reasonable grounds to suspect money laundering or terrorist financing. These are, again, then reported to the jurisdictional authorities. This is a very similar process for sanctions violations, for client screening, any type of kind of compliance function. So I focus a little bit on the actual transaction monitoring, but it's a very similar process for some of those sanctions and client screening processes. As far as targeted behavior detection, so this is kind of an interesting one, and it's really about how do we use the data that we have to articulate the human behavior that we're looking for. So I mentioned earlier, so whether it's, victims of human trafficking have a certain behavior that can't always be boiled down to a few, okay, lots of hotel spending, their certain percentage of their income is from this source, and they make this structure of transactions. It's really more a behavioral problem. And in these cases, we'll consume data, whether it's their details, their transactions, how they interact with the bank, whether it's a call or online. And then we'll use our capabilities that I discussed previously to really let the machine articulate those behaviors, conduct our machine learning, and then present to the investigative effort. This particular client is believed to be, a suspect doing human trafficking, and we'll also use prediction inflation. So in this case, the particular row level features of that model that would say, I think this person is a victim of human trafficking because of this, this, and this, or discount it because of this, and then let's the investigator quickly triage and say, okay, the model thought it was a victim because they're traveling all across the country, a ton of hotel spending, late at night, and then okay, we can discount that because they're a traveling salesperson, and we just didn't have the KYC data up to date. So then it allows them to triage that quickly, combined with, of course, the visual analytics that can very quickly let an investigator make a decision. Lastly, so this is just an example of some content capabilities. So what you're looking at here on the right this is every written suspicious transaction report we've conducted after we've gone through some word embedding to put it in a vector space. So without getting too much into the details, words and documents that have a similar context would have a similar vector and would be, fruit and vehicles will be closer together in the little diagram on the left there. So we'll use these analytics to understand our own business. What concepts are we filing suspicious transaction reports on? What is the nature of those? And then can we understand how that changes over time? Are we comfortable with it? Just an example of that. Okay, moving on to kind of a technology stack. I know this slide's a little bit of just a logo diarrhea, but I couldn't really think of another way to kind of go through our entire stack and how we work in a few minutes. But really, the philosophy is to enable analytics with a flexible ecosystem. And we really combine aspects of data and different database systems with for a business unit, a very technology-first kind of DevOps pipeline, which I see as a coming trend in analytics teams, is starting to treat analytics and models more as a technology. And of course, some certain platforms that we use heavily for different pieces. In general, I would say we're primarily a Python shop for most of our capability development, and of course there's all kinds of different ways and different edge cases where that's not the case. As far as future directions, so again, any caveats on forward-looking statements still apply here, but in general, we do see a bit of a shift to more of an intelligence-driven approach to the industry. So rather than a compliance for compliance sake, more of a how do we actually make an impact across that value chain to really make sure we're getting the efficiency on our on all of the financial institutions' investment into this problem. I think one of the big areas where we'll see a lot more in the next few years is around information sharing, whether that's information sharing between private sector entities with public sector, or between the two. I also see, we foresee a big adoption of more digital identities and identity management, which I think we've seen progress even at a quicker pace in the quarantine aspects. From an pure analytics aspect, we're seeing pretty extensive adoption of machine learning, a little bit of a transition from some red flag kind of rule break models to more of a machine learning type model, with all of the maintainability pros there. So rather than going back and adjusting these rules and these thresholds and doing thorough analysis, we can we'll dynamically monitor our models. We also see, and this kind of goes in line with the increased information sharing, but more extensive use of graph analytics between different financial institutions, between different products. Active learning is a pretty popular topic right now in research, but I think the financial crime space in general is very much a good candidate for the active learning, given the complexity that does require some really high investigative expertise. To put the human in the loop on those model developments is going to provide quite a bit of lift. Model validation and model monitoring. So I kind of mentioned this. We're going to see those cycles shorten quite a bit, I would suspect. So the model validation process is quite robust and for good reason. But the pace that we can develop new models and evaluate them and champion challenger approaches, there'll be an increased need for ongoing model monitoring, faster validation. And then lastly is, I think there's still an underutilization of the natural language processing capabilities, in particular, all of the documents, all of the calls, all of the bank interactions, some of the content that I described earlier. From a data and technology, I mentioned already, so some DevOps adoption, so treating analytics as kind of a development and operations function, not as a side of the desk. Here's some analytics without all of the quality assurance controls around them, and this has been ongoing for quite a while, but I see that continuing. Kind of in line with the information sharing, I suspect, and there's been quite a bit of work already on some privacy preserving technologies. So whether it's training models on 2 different data sets that have been encrypted, whether it's protecting PII in these different ecosystems, and then of course there's still quite a lot of untapped data sources that aren't being leveraged to their full potential. And I think lastly, just to kind of wrap it up, as far as AML careers, so we kind of split things up into different groups of competencies. And I'm sure every financial institution or Big Four, other consulting firms, there's really a role for any combination of these skills, right from business intelligence analysts to investigative expertise, to the data scientists and the machine learners and the analytics people, to the technology stack of big data engineers, and really it comes down to, of course, your core competencies being leadership, communication, problem solving, the ability to design a solution, articulate a problem. The second bucket is your business expertise. How much specifics about money laundering and financial systems, financial products. how to conduct investigations and what threads do you pull on, aspects of policy, legislation, regulations. What would particular jurisdiction, what can you do, what do you have to do, where are you going to get the lift, what does it mean in a new sector, an existing sector. From a technology side, there's everything from your buttonology of user applications, whether it's the custom applications or kind of some of the industry standard data visualization like Tableau or what have you. Database technologies, programming, DevOps, data architecture, engineering. And then I think lastly, but one of the most important right across pretty much every role is a concept of data literacy. It's just not really acceptable in any role, at least in our financial crime space, to not have at least some aspect of data literacy, and whether that means just interpreting the results of a data story and understanding the visualization, whether it's knowing the actual business data expertise. Where did this come from? What is collected? How is it used? Where does it go? And then, of course, all of the analytic expertise of machine learning and natural language processing, graph analytics. All of those kind of fall in that data literacy bucket. So with that, I think that's about a half hour. King, I think we'll just open it up for questions at this point. How's that?
Oh, sorry, I had myself muted there. So we have one question so far. I'm sure a few more will come. Are you concerned with false positives or false negatives in your analysis? And maybe you want to elaborate on how you guys deal with that. Any particular concerns or challenges? Which ones are more of a particular concern in this line of work?
Sure. I mean, that's actually a really topical question. And I mean, without giving a non-answer, it depends. An additional kind of complication, I think, in the financial crime space is we're not necessarily sure what the end result was. So, it takes a lot of time. If we identify this particular baddie, we file a report. It could be, a year before there's a prosecution, or there may be a deal made. But in general, it's not quite as fast feedback as in some other modeling scenarios. That said, there is a certain amount of risk, whether it's a false positive. There's time and effort involved in those investigations, and there can be impact to the business and to the clients if we say this behavior is outside of our risk tolerance when maybe it was just a false positive. But then at the same time, any false negatives can have big implications as far as financial penalties. So we're generally more conservative, and we want to get better recall. But it does depend, I think, on the type of application.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are definitely some challenges, and it's interesting to hear that it's like even if you identify somebody and report them to the appropriate authorities or internal resources, it could be a while before you actually find out and get feedback on that particular individual, and then feedback obviously on your model and any adjustments that you might need to make. Okay, great. I don't think there are any more questions, but Paul, I will forward you any questions that the students will ask me after the fact, because a bunch of them. Oh, you have a question? How does the lag in feedback affect the strength and accuracy of the models used, and is there anything done to mitigate that?
Another great question, because it's very timely, and I think kind of some of the comments on increased information sharing right across the industry is to specifically address that, because it can very much be a problem, and we don't have the best answers because we're really only targeting what we think is suspicious or unusual. So that lag can make things extra challenging when it comes to modeling. But I think as far as mitigation, it really is the industry awareness and information sharing on, yes, this was good, or no, this is not. Sharing with other financial institutions, say, hey, I think this guy's bad, but I lose sight of those transactions once they hit a different jurisdiction or a different FI. So you don't have that confirmation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I imagine that's going to be really useful as the industry and the regulatory bodies figure out the balance between privacy and the ability to mitigate these financial crimes or other issues as getting the whole picture is obviously can be more useful at making a determination at finding those bad actors. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate your presentation. And for my students, as a reminder, this video will be available afterwards for viewing, and this will be part of your discussion board. So be sure to make sure to leverage the points and information presented by Paul into your discussion boards, and have and feel free to add your own additional research and analysis as well. And thank you again, Paul, and appreciate your taking your time and effort, and best of luck and stay safe.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.